every practice, every game, we have the GB flag in the changing room. And on that flag are messages the players wrote on the flag at the start, their desired outcomes, why they're here, what they want from this. Nothing to do with wins and losses. There's no talk of medals. It's to do with pride and passion. And, one example could be, my dad is looking down on me was one message that was written on there at a period of time. Another message was, I'm playing for my family. I'm playing with my family. It was all these connection type of messages on there. And the players touch the flag every time they come onto the court for practice. They touch that flag every time they exit the change room. And whether in the games, it was the same. We'd come back in, we'd have our debrief. After a loss, everyone's feeling a bit down and the heads are hanging a bit, but we would remind them, don't forget to stay connected to that flag when you walk out this changing room. So it was a physical thing of touching the flag every practice, every game.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will help you get better at teaching and leading so that you can develop high-performing teams and high-character people. Coaches, welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Alan Keane. Alan is a highly regarded performance basketball coach with a focus on meeting the needs of the people he coaches. He's a Great Britain national team head coach, qualified teacher and PhD candidate, and the co-founder of Movement Sports. In part 2 of this conversation, we draw on Alan's experience coaching a national team to discuss building culture and connection in short windows of time, what to prioritize from a teaching and learning standpoint in short windows, and more. If you enjoyed the episode and want a copy of the free podcast notes, go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes from this episode or any episode. And if you're interested in learning more about what we offer coaches and organizations, go to cuttingedgecoach.com or just send me an email at luke@cuttingedgecoach.com. Now to part 2 of my conversation with Alan Keane. Enjoy the episode. Shifting a little bit, you coach the under-20 national team for Great Britain. And, I'm just really curious, honestly, about some of those dynamics and challenges. You kind of shared earlier about the windows that you have with them, and they're short and the time is limited. And it kind of reminds me of, what a lot of coaches experience with their preseason. Maybe you only have 4 to 6 weeks and then you're playing games, right? So would you just talk a little bit about, how do you go about First, let's talk about how do you go about creating culture and connection, creating that environment that you want to with your team in such a limited amount of time?
Absolutely. Big challenge. And again, it's about being intentional. Like, first of all, as a coach, are you aware that creating a culture and connection amongst the team is critically important? Or are you thinking, right, we've got to get our offensive schemes in, our defensive schemes in? So yes, starting with creating the culture and the connection. I talked to you already about, investing in time and connecting on the phone, even though they're all over the country, somewhere in different countries. Investing time and auditing how many times you do it is important, especially with a roster of 22 players, which is what you start with. And at the younger ages, you'll start with a roster of 30, 34 with the under 16s, under 18s when we did it. But to create the culture, you need to connect them to something bigger than themselves. Connect them to something bigger than this GB under 18 team. Connect them to something bigger than the sport. And there's a lot of talk about, we talk a lot about, and we share narratives about what it is to represent your country, not just in basketball, not just in another domain, but to represent your country, what that actually means. And it's actually keeping that narrative alive. It's not like a YouTube motivational video where we do it once and that's it. We tick that box. We keep it alive, and you keep it alive every single practice. So the way we would keep that alive, we would always start off with a session with the guys about, we call it the bloodlines, and keeping the bloodline alive and well. It means represent your country with pride, distinction, class, dignity, all those important characteristics and traits as humans we would want. And we talk about what the jersey represents. You've read Legacy, I'm sure, and all those things that the All Blacks do. We're not doing all of those, by the way. We're doing the ones that we think are best for us and what we can manage with the time we have. But then all that stuff is fine and everybody does it. The question remains, how do you keep that alive? And I'll share one way we keep it alive. Every practice, every game, we have the GB flag in the changing room. And on that flag are messages the players wrote on the flag at the start. Their desired outcomes, why they're here, what they want from this. Nothing to do with wins and losses. There's no talk of medals. It's to do with pride and passion. And, one example could be, my dad is looking down on me was one message that was written on there at a period of time. Another message was, I'm playing for my family. I'm playing with my family. It was all these connection type of messages on there. And the players touch the flag every time they come onto the court for practice. They touch that flag every time they exit the change room. And whether in the games, it was the same. We'd come back in, we'd have our debrief. After a loss, everyone's feeling a bit down and the heads are hanging a bit, but we would remind them, don't forget to stay connected to that flag when you walk out this changing room. So it was a physical thing of touching the flag every practice, every game. Other ways we cultivated connection, I'm just trying to think of some ways. We would circle time. I remember we were in Macedonia about 7 or 8 years ago. European Championships, 6 players for the first time representing their country. And we get to Macedonia, we're staying in a really rundown hotel. It didn't look safe to even to you. There was a swimming pool in there, but guys were having visions of stepping into that swimming pool and being electrocuted. The tiles were broken on the floor. The food was the same. We had dried chicken and rice every lunch and every dinner for 2 weeks. We had dry cornflakes and toast with, it was routine and it wasn't what the guys thought it would be. I'm representing, GB at the European Championships. They thought it was a whole nother level. They were staying in better hotels in the UK for training camps and stuff and eating more variety of food. So we get there and, the heads drop down like, man, I bust a gut for this. And we had to reconnect them to actually why we're here and what we're doing here. So we did some circle time stuff and, let me just explain what the circle time was. And I think you got to be careful if you do this. You need to have a strong relationship with those players in order to go in this direction. But circle time was for us. We would go around the circle, coaches and staff included. When I say coaches, by the way, Luke, I mean the physio, I mean the team manager, I mean the S&C coach. So the physio is a head coach. He's a head coach if he's the main. Team manager is a head coach. S&C, he's a head coach. I'm their assistant coach. So we look at it that way. So when I say coaches, I mean all that extended staff. Not extended staff, all the staff. Anyway, we go around the circle and everyone shares something we don't know about each other. That's maybe like, what, you didn't know this guy's about. So for me, I was like, okay, guys, I played the djembe, which is a West African hand drum. And I was doing it for 10 years in Camden Market every Sunday. And it was the happiest time of my life. And then basketball came in and took that time away from me, blah, blah, blah. So they didn't know that. They were like, wow, okay, didn't know that. And then we go around the circle the second time and we share something that's funny or embarrassing to the point where we feel safe enough to share it. And one guy shared how he got a Malteser stuck up his nose as a child. They couldn't get it down. So he had to take it to the hospital and basically had to put a heat pad around his nose and melt it down. And, everyone's having a laugh and a joke. And then we get to the third round. And the third round is a bit more sensitive. I was saying to the guys, okay, listen, if you're comfortable, I'd like you to share a moment that was very difficult in your life and that you overcame it. And we know you overcame it because you're sitting here today representing your country. It's up to you what you want to share. If you don't want to share, there's no judgment. That will be fine as well. You can go in any direction you want with this. And that's a potentially dangerous thing to do as well. You've got to make sure that you got to know your group. You got to know your group, because what if one person says, I don't really want to share anything, I'm not comfortable. Well, will that person feel judged now by everybody else? So knowing the group, teeing it up the right way, super important. So we did it. We went around the circle. There was a couple of tears shed. Guys shared some really, difficult stuff. And we finished that with a group hug. Everyone hugged each other, and it just reconnected us to something bigger than the hotel, something bigger than the food, the dry chicken and rice every day. It just connected us back to something bigger than what we were feeling about the desires of being in a European Championship. And it fused us and brought us together. And that was the first week, Luke. Now, I used that moment in actually the semi-final. We played Montenegro in the semi-final that year of the European Championship. And before the semi-final, I walked into the change room, and my usual, game day plan, and I'm going to go in there and give a speech and talk technical, tactical, and then send them out with some motivation. I've changed how I've done it since, by the way. But not that I've anything, that there's anything wrong with that. I've just changed it. But I said, when I walked into that changing room, you could feel the tension. Everybody was on edge. Like, I'd not seen them. I'd not felt that before. So the semi-final, one step removed from the final. And basically, we were in Division B at the time. And if you finish top 3, you get promoted to Division A. And that's always the goal. Actually, to get promoted is always the goal. Everybody wants that. The medal, gold, silver, bronze, nobody cares. Get promoted to Division A. So you're playing against Spain, Serbia, Russia, Turkey, all the big powerhouses. So when I walked into that semi-final changing room, it was a completely different team. Like, anxiety levels through the roof. You could feel the tension. And I walked in and I said, you know what? What I've got in this piece of paper right now is not going to add any value to what these guys need. I said, guys, here's the game plan today. And I ripped it up and I just put it in the bin. And I said, I want to reconnect you back to the first week we sat in that meeting room in the hotel. And we learned something new about each other. We had a laugh at each other because you had chocolate melt that needed melting out of your nose. And we had some deep-rooted stuff that was shared, some really difficult moments that you've all overcome. And I said, right now, this is just another moment that we will overcome. And we're getting ready for a basketball game. You guys have overcome a hell of a lot more difficult things in your lives than a basketball game. So I just tried to take the air out of the room with that way. Did it work? We lost the semifinal. It's not measured. And that's the thing. Like, you're not measuring this stuff on results. Hence, there's a reason why. But I got to use that. So that was one way of kind of cultivating connections within the team. That circle time. Sorry, Luke, I went on quite a long time. That was just one example.
That was fantastic. And there's 3 things that just jumped out at me that I want to highlight. The first is with what you talked about and the flag and the narrative, right? Connect them to a larger narrative, a bigger story. I think that's so important, right? We've got to be telling a story about our team, about their experience in this environment. And then you connected that with this, like you said, really tangible ritual that you guys did every day, right? We've written these messages on the flag and we touch it every day. Like, it is a part of who we are and what we do. It's in our DNA. I think that narratives and rituals, man, those can be so powerful in creating that environment. And then that third piece of what you shared with the circle time there, man, the vulnerability, that's about vulnerability and trust are reinforcing, right? You need to be vulnerable to build trust. And so, you facilitating that, being vulnerable yourself and then, giving players the space to do it, right? Again, like you said, you're in a crappy environment, not what they expected. I can imagine the attitude of those athletes when they are staying in a crummy hotel with crummy food. But to get them really connected to each other, I'm sure just change the rest of your time there. And it's huge.
Changed everything. Let me share one more. I've just thought of one more, Luke. Sorry. I think, and the reason I'm anxious to share this one is because it's new. This club I've moved to in Edinburgh, Birmingham Blaze, they've showed me this. I didn't create this, but you talk about creating culture and connection. This is an amazing little activity that's so simple, but has an amazing feel-good factor. Maybe it's just me. I don't think it is, because the players seem to enjoy it as well. We finish every practice and we call it our usual walk. And we finish every practice by saying, right, guys, grab somebody, off you go. Maybe we give a topic. Maybe we leave it loose sometimes. And we basically, I would choose, let's say we're on the court together, Luke. I would say, all right, Luke, I choose you. And we literally just walk up and down the court for 3 minutes or so, baseline to baseline, just having a chat about anything we want or the topic that was discussed. So last night it was like, that's when that young man told me about all the pressures he's got with uni and how things have really messed up there at the moment. And he's really stressed and blah, 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 and just one thing after another. But the week before was walking up and down, we decided we would talk about, one player chose, let's talk about our goals in life. And I had a wonderful conversation with a young man that told me about, like, he's plans for him and his partner, and, what they want with their futures. And this is after an intense 2-hour practice. It's literally 30 seconds after an intense 2-hour full-on aggressive competitive practice. And we do that at the end of every single practice. And I can tell you, Luke, I'm only learning now. I'm 2 months in with this club, and I'm learning how powerful that is at creating a culture of we care about people. And that's it. And there's a practical example of how to put people first. Because we're not talking about basketball. We're never talking about basketball in our usual walk. And also just about creating connection. It's wonderful. Like, you pick a different person after every practice.
That's so good, man. It's so practical too. Just make it a habit, right? Make it a routine to connect and build that trust, build those relationships. Shifting a little bit, but still kind of in that same vein of, this short window that you have to prepare with the national team. Just tell me some of the things that you're prioritizing when it comes to practice design and teaching and learning when you have this short window to prepare. I know this is a broad question.
I'll narrow it down. I mean, in terms of what we do, short window preparation. We base everything from a tactical standpoint, because with the national team, you're not coaching a lot of technical details. You don't have that time. It's building a style of game. It's building your offensive schemes, your defensive schemes. We start with devising a player strengths and weakness document that we update after at the end of every day of camp. We got 7 coaches sitting around a whiteboard discussing the strengths and weaknesses of each player based on what we saw that day. And their strengths and weaknesses, not as players what they did with their club, but players what they're doing within the national team environment, because it's obviously different. And their style of game basically emerges from what comes out of that. So Luke's strengths are he can shoot the ball. He's good. He gets out early in transition. His weaknesses are he's off-ball defense. He doesn't see the ball play his man regularly as much as he should. His position vision anticipation is weak. So now we're able to shape how we're going to use you to maximize your strengths. It's all about maximizing players' strengths, but we're identifying the weaknesses to keep them away from those areas as much as possible. And again, I said to you a while ago, we start by building learning. Whatever we do, we're basing it on their previous experiences. What are they good at? What have they done before? What are they comfortable with? So Luke is a great on-ball defensive player. Well, okay, we're going to put him into full court defensive position a lot. We're going to pick up early. When Luke, Alan, Simon, Matt are on the court, we're pressing. When Jimmy, John, Mike, you're on the court, we're not pressing. We're back into quarter court defense. So we're building what we did on their previous experiences, because I'm back to saying I'm not the expert in that, Jim. Neither are any of the coaches. The players are the experts. And we're going to use their expertise to shape the environment, the style of game, the offensive and defensive schemes. So we're prioritizing the strengths. Now, here's the balance when you coach a national team, Luke. And I have this conversation with the performance director for years. Like, especially with the GB under 20s, it's very simple. But with the GB under 16s, when they're 14 and 15 and 16-year-olds, we do have to think about their development, their cognitive development, their tactical development, their technical development, their physical development. So we do have a responsibility to develop their competencies inside of the style of game that we're playing as well. And there's a part of it, you will mold the style of game to actually their development, not necessarily their strengths. When you get to the GB under 20s, it flips a little bit more. You're building the style of game based on what they've done previously. So that's how you manage it in a short window in terms of style of game, in terms of what you do. And then I'll say this one. We start every, so to get to that point, what do? We start every single practice with 5-on-5. We do game warm-up and we go straight into 5v5 and we just work on different things in that 5v5. We're not doing 2-on-0, 3-on-0, horns down offense build up. We're going straight into 5v5 in the very first camp, very first session. And we're asking the players to self-assess and to assess each other, because the culture we want to build is you need to have a voice and a choice on the floor. You need to be scanning and assessing. You need to be cognitively drained as more than physically drained when you leave the practice today, because when we play Serbia, we need to be firing on all cylinders when it comes to the decisions we make. So we're very hot on the decision-making element. And the way we do it is we put them in situations where they have to self-assess, where they have to assess each other. So for example, we give them a whiteboard at the start of each practice. They write their opposition names on it. So you've got Luke and Alan who are on the national team together, but Luke's on the red team, Alan's on the white team. And now every time out, every stoppage of play, where coaches are telling the players, go to your whiteboard, fill in your game plan. So I'm going Luke, shooter, pour off ball defense. Let's look to cut the tag. Every time he's tagging, let's look to 45 cut him, or let's look to baseline cut Luke every time. But we can't leave him alone. It's got to be long closeouts. And as a teammate, I'm talking to my teammates, writing this stuff on the board. So we finished 25 minutes of playing. We've got 2 scouting reports that the players constructed on these 2 whiteboards. It gives us a chance to see what they're seeing, what they're planning. And we build from there. You build from there. That's the very first session, very first day. But doing those type of activities, you can kind of maximize the growth and take them in the direction you want to go.
Yeah, I love that. And, built into that whiteboard activity that you just shared is some good and probably some hard feedback for players too. When you're
building connection,
when your peer says like, this kid can't shoot, or this kid doesn't defend the ball well, it takes a little bit of it, and it's probably delicate. You got to manage the environment, but it takes a little bit away from you as the coach of just saying, hey, look, like these guys are playing against you, and this is what they're noticing is your weakness here. What do you think are some solutions for how, you can grow in here, or let me offer you some coaching on how you can improve your on ball or off ball defense. Because part of coaching is just helping, athletes identify where are they currently weak. Like you talked about, you and the coaches are sitting around identifying those strengths and weaknesses. But if they can be made aware of it, those weaknesses, even without you being the one to make them aware of it, I think that's almost, it's kind of a clever way to get to that place where you can really coach them and give them some hard feedback at times.
Yeah, but it's all based around reality. I mean, there's, at this stage and age, those guys have had enough. They've had a lot of success in their clubs. Otherwise, they wouldn't be national team players. So, it's reality, and you can't lie to them. You can't fool them, and they've got to be honest with themselves. You've got to help raise their awareness. It's a tricky one, because most of those guys will come to you feeling like they should be taking 25 shots. They all feel like they should be playing 35 minutes out of 40. And then, 16s, especially, reality hits, and then you've got to manage that after. You definitely have to manage that. Be mindful of it before you do these tasks, and then be ready to manage it. Be intentional how you're going to deal with those issues that come up that you just mentioned.
Yeah. Well, Alan, this has been fantastic. I have 3 really quick rapid fire questions for you that I ask all the guests, and then we'll hop off. The first is this: the most fun part of coaching is?
The most fun part of coaching is coaching, and coaching is more than tech tack, as we've talked about, and getting to know people. Like our usual walk in Bermuda Blaze after every practice is one of the most enjoyable parts of the practice for me, because I'm engaging with people. People are letting me into their lives, Luke, and they're making me feel special, because they make me feel valued, needed, wanted, respected, because they listen to what I ask them to do. But that's a two-way process. So I'll put it down to the relation. It's a bit cliche, maybe some will say, but I genuinely mean it's down to the relationships that I get to build.
Yeah, That's so good. I wish I would have known blank before my first coaching experience.
I wish I would have known blank before my first coaching experience. I'm going to say I wish. I'm going to say I'm not going to fill that in. I wouldn't fill that in because if I had known something, would I have approached it and made the mistakes I've made, which have been valuable learning experiences? Probably not. So I'd rather have it the way I've had it, maybe, and learn. I like learning from mistakes. I like trialing stuff. I like making errors. I'm comfortable with it, whether it's the pro team or, it's a coach development or it's a junior team. Those mistakes are important to me because I review stuff. I consider myself a strong reflective practitioner, Luke. So those moments are important for me. So I'm not going to fill that one in if that's okay.
Well, I love it. I love the non-answer there. And at some point, maybe we need to do a part 2 and hit on some of those reflective practices that you implement, because I think that's powerful. Last one. I know I'm successful as a coach when...
Oh, that's difficult. I know I'm successful as a coach when I meet VM Wadwa, I'm going to put his name out there, and I meet Lewis Bailey and Shaquille Raheem, and Dalvin and all those guys. When I meet those guys and in the street and they're in their mid to late 20s and they give me a hug. And I'm describing what has happened with those guys. These are guys I coached from, in high school from the age of 11 right through to 18. And then we all went our separate ways. And I met those guys, a couple of just pre-pandemic. And, they picked me up off the ground, man. It was amazing. It was an emotional moment. Like the hugs were sincere. And Luke, I think back to those days, I coached those guys hard back then. I didn't know as much I wasn't as an effective coach then as I am now, and I hope that process will continue. But I know I'm a successful coach when those guys hug you with authenticity and genuine love.
That's so good. And tying back to the first thing we talked about, you don't have that unless you put people first. So I love that. Well, Coach, this has been fantastic. Before we hop off, just share with people where they can connect with you.
You can connect with me on Twitter if you wish at Coach Keane 14. I follow a lot of people. I steal more than I give on Twitter, and I steal a lot from you, Luke, by the way. And also, if you want to send me an email, it's alan@movementsports.com. That's MVMT, alan@movementmvmtsports.com.
Awesome. Thanks, Alan. I appreciate your time a bunch.
My pleasure. Thank you, Luke.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and a huge thanks to Alan for joining me. As always, if you enjoyed the episode and want to grab a copy of the podcast notes, go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details. My biggest takeaways from this episode are the practical examples that Alan shared about connecting your team to a larger narrative and creating connection. The 3 things that stood out to me were the flag ritual with the GB national team, their circle time, and the usual walks that he mentioned they do at Burmere Blaze. The thing that I love about these 3 examples, with the exception of the circle time, is they really don't take a lot of time. It's more about a commitment to do small things consistently that will build our culture and create a connected team. I think it's totally worth sacrificing 3 minutes of your practice time to build a team that's truly connected to one another. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's just a commitment to building small, impactful routines that bring that vision you have for your team's culture to life. Like I mentioned in the intro, if you want to learn more about how we serve coaches and organizations, go to cuttingedgecoach.com or just reach out to me via email. And if you enjoyed this episode, would you take a minute to leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts and or give us a shout out on Twitter? It goes a long ways in helping us share with other coaches. Thanks for listening to the podcast.